I'm a little late to the party on this one, but having recently seen the movie Kingsman: The Secret Service, I was amazed by how so many people have misunderstood this movie on a fundamental level, and that includes a number of professional film critics. There are two scenes in Kingsman that have created a great deal of controversy. The first is a violent massacre at a Westboro Baptist-like church where Colin Firth's character Harry Hart is mind-controlled to slaughter the people at the church service while Freebird plays over the scene. At the end of the film, the protagonist, Eggleston, asks an imprisoned princess for a kiss if he saves the world. She replies that if he saves the world, she will give him more than a kiss, and that they can do it in the asshole. The film ends with this gag paying off in a particularly crass way. Both of these scenes have become infamous following the film's release, but in order to understand them, one must understand the themes and style of the film itself. Kingsman is a dumb, R-rated, over-the-top action movie, but is also a class satire. Most people get that Kingsman is a send-up of early James Bond and mocks the conventions of those films savagely, yet they don't see to what ends Matthew Vaughn is applying this critique. Even some of the people who got what the film was getting at seem to take the film's message as the opposite of what it actually was, including this Guardian article. What the film is getting at can be summed up with a single scene from the movie. The film's villain, an internet mogul played by Samuel L. Jackson, has Colin Firth's gentleman spy Harry Hart over for dinner. The setting and presentation is very highbrow as his assistant rolls out a cart of covered food. When the cover is removed, however, we see that what is under it is McDonald's. The two then proceed to eat the fast food while discussing what wine goes best with a Big Mac. The scene is the film's thematic interest in a microcosm. The early Bond films are presented in a way that makes them seem very sophisticated, with sadistic violence and casual misogyny presented through subtlety and innuendo. Vaughn has created a satire of those films that replaces this with bluntness and crassness, but the actual implications of what is being presented remains the same. In addition, the hero of Kingsman is a working-class kid who has never been given a chance to shine because of circumstances, and the villain's plan is one that shows a complete disregard for the poor at the expense of the rich. Many viewers have made a lot of the race of Samuel L. Jackson's villain Valentine. If race means anything to this equation, Vaughn picked Jackson and dressed him in a faux hip-hop attire in order to show how the rich manipulate the poor to think that they are really one of them. Jackson's villain is parallel to Steve Jobs, something that has become a bit of a cliche lately, but for this character it makes sense. Valentine's plan is to curb global warming by using the promise of free internet for the poor to mind control them into murderous zombies. This allows the rich to kill the poor and stop the threat of global warming without having to sacrifice anything themselves. The fact that the film is not criticizing the poor but aiming its satire at the rich is so obvious that the fact that many critics are arguing the opposite is head-spinning. The climax ends with all the rich people who have gone along with the plot and having their heads literally explode from implants Valentine has put inside them. The satire involving Valentine is made complete by the fact he can't stand the sight of blood. His assistant, who has legs made of razor-sharp blades, covers up the bodies with a sheet before he enters in an early scene. Valentine does horrendous things to people, but he can't look at the actual damage he has caused. This brings up the church massacre. Before the scene really begins, the church group is made to be as vile as possible to stack the deck against audience sympathies. The movie doesn't make it explicitly clear Harry Hart is under mind control when the violence starts. However, even while the violence is being portrayed as goofy fun with Freebird playing in the background, we constantly cut back to Eggleston being horrified by the sight he is witnessing. Most important is what follows. Harry exits the church and confronts Valentine, who reveals that he has made everybody in the church violent psychopaths by using a cell phone signal. There is an exchange between them where Valentine proposes he reveal his evil plan and put Hart into an elaborate death trap. When Harry says this sounds good to him, Valentine responds that this isn't that kind of movie and then shoots him dead. The contrast of graphic violence directed at a character who we have grown to care about right after we have seen him massacre people we have been directed to hate is conscious. I just shot somebody, Valentine says, shaking in disgust. Isn't it great, his assistant asks. No, it feels shitty, Valentine says. This is the kind of mood shift that Quentin Tarantino does in his movies all the time, and Vaughn executes it no less masterfully. But for some reason people seem far more offended by it than they are when Tarantino does it. Maybe it's just because critics don't take Vaughn as seriously as they take Tarantino, or maybe it is that Kingsman is far more political than anything Tarantino has ever done. Either way, Vaughn has, in the course of a single scene, presented us with horrific acts of violence and twisted our emotions to find it to be cathartic, funny, and horrifying all in quick order. The princess scene works on a similar level to this one, though I would argue it is actually less effective. In Bond films, the reward to Bond of sex is given, but it is usually presented with subtlety. The princess was locked up by Valentine for being one of the few of the rich and powerful to not go along with his plan to slaughter the poor. The fact that the scene is crass, blunt, comes out of nowhere, and seems at odds with how the princess has been presented as a character previously is the whole point of the scene. This is the Bond sex payoff without any of the slickness that makes it palatable. It asks you why, if you are offended by this, you aren't offended by how the Bond films treat women, since it is virtually the same thing. In fact, I would argue the Bond films treat women worse because there are several times in Bond films where Bond actually tricks women into sleeping with him by deceiving them in some way. Of course, the effectiveness as satire is less masterful in the princess scene than it is in the church scene. It also runs into the trouble of all satire that by presenting the very thing it is criticizing, many people misunderstand it to be that thing. I get that, and I have already seen it in some of the defenders of Kingsman, where the film's defenders actually defend the misogyny the film is satirizing. However, if we are going to judge art by the ability of the average person to understand it, we are going to lose a large number of our greatest artworks. However, there are two other defenses of Vaughn that I have seen that trouble me. One such defense is that the movie cannot be sexist because Vaughn's co-writer is Jane Goldman, a woman with strong feminist bona fides. This is true, though this defense assumes that Goldman has equal power in the decisions being made in the filmmaking process, and that she cannot create something that is sexist because she is a woman. I think this is proven false by the change Vaughn and Goldman made to the comic book Kick-Ass, where the main character's deceiving of his crush is rewarded with sex. In the comic, she is angry with him and then sends him a picture of her performing oral sex on her black boyfriend. So basically, Vaughn and Goldman had previously delivered a movie that treats women with the same sexism that they seem to be satirizing here. A second defense is that since Kick-Ass and Kingsman are based on comic books by Mark Millar, what Vaughn is doing is supposedly subverting the reactionary tendencies of Millar, and the movies seem reactionary because Millar's work is reactionary. This strikes me as an obviously false claim when looking at the work of Millar, and the only evidence given of this is the fact that in Kick-Ass the comic, the protagonist is racist, while in the movie this is dropped. The author of a blog even points out the blowjob picture in Kick-Ass as proof because it is portrayed as disgusting for a white woman to be performing oral sex on a black man, missing the whole point that it is disgusting to Kick-Ass because Kick-Ass is a racist reactionary white boy who gets his jollies dressing in a suit and fighting crime. Though I like the movie Kick-Ass and includes much of the same style as Kingsman, I think it is actually inferior to the comic, partially because it isn't willing to go as far into the savage satire of superheroes that the comic is. James Gunn's Super is a similar movie, which is ironically closer to the spirit of the Kick-Ass comic than Vaughn's movie version of Kick-Ass is. My overall point is saying the guy who made Nick Fury black, the Wasp Asian, Colossus gay, and wrote the gay couple Midnighter and Apollo in the Authority comics is a reactionary with racist, classist, and homophobic views is completely absurd. I think if anything, Vaughn has watered down Millar rather than served as a satiric counterpoint to him.